The girl fell face first on the pavement as Karen shouted, "This isn't a hospital." The aluminum crutches clattered against the concrete sidewalk, their rubber tips skittering across the rough surface like startled insects. 10-year-old Lily Morrison's hands scraped raw against the unforgiving ground. Her pink backpack spilling its contents a worn copy of Charlotte's Web, colored pencils, and a handmade bookmark that read, "Future Librarian," in careful cursive. 20 minutes earlier, Lily had been walking slowly but determinedly toward the community center, where the Willow Creek Neighborhood Association hosted their monthly children's reading program. Her cerebral palsy required the use of forearm crutches, but she navigated the tree-lined streets with practiced ease, her dark curls bouncing with each careful step. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and apple cider from Mrs. Henderson's house, where she always prepared treats for the young readers. Lily loved these Saturday mornings. The reading program had become her sanctuary, a place where her disability faded into the background as she lost herself in stories of brave heroines and magical worlds. Today, she carried her favorite book to share during the group discussion. She had spent the entire week preparing her thoughts about Charlotte's friendship with Wilbur, how the spider's words had literally saved the pig's life. The peaceful morning shattered when Karen Whitmore emerged from her perfectly manicured house at 1247 Maple Street, like a spider sensing prey in her web. Karen served as the unofficial aesthetic compliance officer for the HOA, a self-appointed position that gave her license to patrol the neighborhood with military precision. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her pearl necklace caught the morning sunlight as she strode down her pristine walkway. "Excuse me, young lady." Karen's voice cut through the air with the sharpness of breaking glass. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Lily paused, adjusting her grip on the crutches. She had encountered Karen before, though never directly. The woman was notorious throughout Willow Creek for her complaints about everything from mailbox heights to the inappropriate color of Mrs. Patterson's garden gnomes. "I'm going to the reading program at the community center," Lily replied politely, the way her parents had taught her to address adults. Karen's eyes narrowed as they swept over the crutches, her lip curling with unmistakable disdain. "Those things are completely disrupting the aesthetic harmony of our neighborhood. This is a family community, not a medical facility. Children should be running and playing, not hobbling around with hospital equipment." The words hit Lily like physical blows. She had heard whispers and stares before, but never such naked hostility from an adult. Her cheeks flushed red, and she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came when people reduced her to nothing more than her disability. "These help me walk," Lily said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, please." Karen stepped closer, her designer perfume overwhelming in its cloying sweetness. "Half you kids today are just looking for attention. In my day, children with real problems stayed inside where they belonged. We didn't parade our issues around for everyone to see." Lily's hands tightened on the crutch grips. She could feel her pulse quickening, the way it did when she had to give a presentation at school. But this felt different, more dangerous. Karen's presence seemed to fill the entire sidewalk, blocking Lily's path like an immovable barrier. "I need to get to the reading program," Lily said, trying to step around the woman. Karen moved to block her path. "What you need is to learn some respect for community standards. Do you have any idea how property values work? People invest their life savings in these homes, and then you come clomping around with those metal contraptions, making the whole neighborhood look like a rehabilitation center." The cruelty in Karen's voice was breathtaking. Lily had faced challenges her entire young life, had endured surgeries and physical therapy sessions that would break most adults. But she had never encountered such deliberate meanness from someone who was supposed to be a pillar of the community. My dad says everyone deserves to participate, Lily said, finding a spark of courage in her father's words. Karen laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the pristine houses. Your dad clearly doesn't understand how civilized neighborhoods operate. Let me explain something to you. Little girl, this community has rules, standards that keep us all safe and happy. Your presence here with those things violates every principle we've worked to maintain. She gestured dismissively at the crutches as if they were contaminated objects. I'm sure your parents mean well, but they're doing you no favors by encouraging this public display. Real communities take care of problems quietly, behind closed doors. Lily felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned early in life that crying in public only made things worse, gave people like Karen more ammunition to use against her. I'm not a problem, she said, her voice stronger now. I'm just trying to go to the reading program. Well, you're not going anywhere with those things disrupting our peaceful Saturday morning. Karen's voice rose to a pitch that seemed to vibrate through the quiet neighborhood. I have every right as a homeowner and community leader to ensure our standards are maintained. What happened next would replay in Lily's nightmares for weeks to come. Karen reached out with both hands and yanked the crutches away from Lily's arms with such sudden violence that the child had no time to prepare. Without the support she depended on, Lily's legs buckled immediately, sending her crashing face first onto the unforgiving concrete sidewalk. The impact sent shockwaves through her small body. Her palms scraped raw against the pavement, and her knee struck the edge of a concrete seam with a sickening crack. Blood began to seep from multiple scrapes, staining her favorite yellow sweater that her grandmother had knitted for her 10th birthday. This isn't a hospital, Karen shouted triumphantly, holding the crutches above her head like trophies. Find somewhere else to practice your little sympathy performance. Lily lay on the ground, stunned by the sudden assault. The pain from her scraped hands and bruised knee paled in comparison to the psychological trauma of being attacked by an adult for simply existing in public space. She could taste blood where she had bitten her tongue during the fall. Please, she whispered, reaching toward her crutches. I need those to stand up. Karen clutched the crutches tighter, her knuckles white with determination. You'll get them back when you learn to behave appropriately in a respectable neighborhood. Maybe your parents will finally understand that actions have consequences. Several neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by Karen's shouting. Mrs. Chen, from across the street, started toward them, her face creased with concern. But Karen waved her away with imperial authority. Everything's under control here, Karen announced to the gathering crowd, just teaching a valuable lesson about community responsibility. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who always made treats for the reading program, stepped forward with her walker. Karen, what on earth are you doing? That child is hurt. She's perfectly fine, Karen snapped, just learning that her little performances won't work in this neighborhood. We have standards here. Helen, some of us still care about maintaining them. Lily struggled to push herself up on her elbows, her scraped palms burning against the concrete. Without her crutches, she couldn't stand independently, leaving her trapped on the ground while Karen towered over her like a conquering general. My dad is going to be really upset, Lily said quietly, more to herself than to Karen. Karen snorted with derision. Your dad can file all the complaints he wants. I am the aesthetic compliance officer for this HOA, appointed by the board to maintain our community standards. I have every legal right to confiscate disruptive equipment that violates our neighborhood covenant. She pulled out her phone with theatrical flair. In fact, I'm calling HOA security right now to document this violation and ensure these contraptions are properly disposed of. Mrs. Henderson knelt beside Lily, her weathered hands gentle as she examined the scrapes. "Sweetheart, what's your father's name? We need to call him right away." "David Morrison," Lily whispered, wincing as Mrs. Henderson carefully helped her sit up. Karen's finger paused over her phone screen. The name triggered a faint memory. Something she had heard at a neighborhood barbecue or HOA meeting. But she couldn't quite place it. David Morrison. It sounded familiar, but Karen was too intoxicated by her own authority to pay attention to warning signals. "Morrison," she repeated thoughtfully. "Well, Mr. Morrison is about to learn that his daughter's theatrics won't be tolerated in Willow Creek. I'm documenting this entire incident for the HOA board and local authorities." She began taking photos of Lily sitting on the ground, her scraped hands and torn sweater, as if the injured child were evidence of successful law enforcement rather than victim of an unprovoked attack. 2 HOA security guards arrived within minutes, both men in their 50s, who took weekend shifts to supplement their retirement incomes. They had responded to Karen's calls before, usually for minor infractions like slightly overgrown grass or improperly positioned garbage cans. "What seems to be the problem here, Mrs. Whitmore?" asked Jerry, the senior guard, his voice professionally neutral. Karen straightened her pearls and assumed her most authoritative posture. "I've confiscated unauthorized medical equipment that was disrupting our neighborhood's aesthetic standards. This child was using these devices to create a public spectacle, clearly violating Section 12 of our community covenant regarding appropriate public behavior." Jerry looked down at Lily, still sitting on the ground with Mrs. Henderson's protective arm around her shoulders. His expression shifted uncomfortably as he took in the scraped hands and torn clothing. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "those appear to be mobility aids. I'm not sure we have authority to—" "We have absolute authority," Karen interrupted. "I am the aesthetic compliance officer, duly appointed by the HOA board. These devices create an institutional atmosphere that violates our residential character standards. I demand you confiscate them immediately and escort this child off community property." The second guard, Tom, shifted nervously. He had a granddaughter about Lily's age and couldn't shake the feeling that they were witnessing something deeply wrong. "Mrs. Whitmore, maybe we should call the child's parents first. This seems like a situation that requires—" "The parents will be dealt with through proper channels," Karen declared. "Right now, I need you to support my enforcement of community standards. That's what you're paid to do." Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I've called Lily's father. He's on his way." Karen smiled with vicious satisfaction. "Perfect. Mr. Morrison can witness firsthand what happens when children violate our community standards. Maybe this will finally teach him to keep his family's problems private." She had no idea that David Morrison was currently in his car, speaking rapidly into his Bluetooth headset with the kind of controlled fury that comes from years of federal law enforcement training. His daughter's tearful, whispered phone call had activated every protective instinct in his body. But more than that, it had triggered his professional expertise in civil rights violations. As the director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, David Morrison had spent his career prosecuting exactly this type of targeted harassment against disabled individuals. He had built cases against school districts, employers, and housing authorities who had violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. Never in his wildest nightmares had he imagined needing that expertise to protect his own daughter in their own neighborhood. Karen continued her performance for the growing crowd of neighbors, holding Lily's crutches like evidence in a criminal trial. Let this be a lesson to everyone about maintaining appropriate standards. We cannot allow our community to become a magnet for every sob story and medical problem in the county. Her voice carried the righteous certainty of someone who believed herself to be fighting a holy war against the forces of decline. In her mind, she was protecting property values, preserving neighborhood character, and upholding the natural order that kept undesirable elements at bay. Lily sat quietly on the concrete, her pain now overshadowed by a growing understanding of how cruel the adult world could be. She had always known she was different, had faced stares and questions about her crutches, but this was her first encounter with someone who actively hated her for existing in public space. The sound of a car door slamming echoed through the quiet street like a gunshot. David Morrison's Honda Civic looked utterly ordinary, parked behind the HOA security vehicle. But the man who emerged from it carried himself with the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect in the most serious situations. David was tall and lean, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He wore a simple polo shirt and khakis, his weekend uniform, but something in his posture suggested coiled power beneath the casual exterior. His gaze swept the scene with practiced assessment, his daughter on the ground, the scraped hands and torn clothing, the woman holding her crutches like weapons. "Daddy." Lily's voice cracked with relief and residual fear. David knelt beside his daughter, his hands gentle as he examined her injuries. His voice was soft when he spoke to her, but something in his tone made the gathering crowd take an involuntary step backward. "Are you hurt anywhere else? Sweetheart, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Karen stepped forward, still clutching the crutches. "Mr. Morrison, I presume I'm Karen Whitmore, Aesthetic Compliance Officer for the Willow Creek HOA. Your daughter was creating a public disturbance with unauthorized medical equipment, violating our community standards for appropriate SYA." "Ma'am." David's voice cut through her speech with surgical precision. "I need you to return my daughter's mobility devices immediately." Something in his tone made Karen hesitate for the first time since the confrontation began. This wasn't the defensive, apologetic parent she had expected. David Morrison spoke with the kind of quiet authority that made seasoned criminals confess their crimes. "These devices were confiscated for violation of community standards," Karen said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "As Aesthetic Compliance Officer, I have full authority to—" "No," David said simply. "You don't—" He helped Lily to her feet, supporting her weight with one arm while reaching into his back pocket with the other. The federal badge and identification appeared in his hand like a magic trick, the morning sunlight catching the gold seal of the Department of Justice. "Special Agent David Morrison, Director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Ma'am, I need you to return my daughter's mobility aids immediately and step away from her." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Karen's face went through a rapid series of color changes, from confident pink to shocked white to nauseated green. The crutches slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the sidewalk with the sound of her entire world collapsing. Jerry, the senior security guard, immediately moved to retrieve the crutches and hand them to David. "Sir, we had no idea about the nature of the situation. Mrs. Whitmore called us regarding a community standards violation. But if we had known—" "You're not in trouble," David said quietly, his focus still on Karen. "But I need you to document everything you witnessed here today. This is now a federal civil rights investigation." The words fell into the quiet morning like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled neighbors. Mrs. Henderson pulled out her phone and began recording, her expression grim with determination. Karen found her voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. I didn't know. I was just enforcing community standards." "Community standards," David repeated, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent prosecuting discrimination. Ma'am, what you've done here today constitutes a clear violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically Section 302, regarding public accommodations, and Section 504, regarding program accessibility. He gently helped Lily adjust her crutches, checking to ensure they hadn't been damaged during Karen's violent seizure. More significantly, your actions constitute disability-based harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and potentially criminal assault against a minor. Karen's legs seemed to lose their strength. She reached for her garden gate to steady herself, her pearls trembling against her throat. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to maintain neighborhood standards. The HOA board approved my position as aesthetic compliance officer. Ma'am. David's voice carried the patience of someone who had explained constitutional law to countless defendants. No HOA board in America has the authority to override federal civil rights protections. Your self-appointed position carries no legal weight whatsoever. Tom, the younger security guard, cleared his throat nervously. Sir, should we be calling local police? This seems like something that requires official documentation. David nodded approvingly. Excellent thinking. I'll also be contacting my colleagues in the Civil Rights Division to initiate a formal investigation. This type of systematic harassment against disabled individuals often indicates broader patterns of discrimination. He pulled out his phone, and Karen watched in growing horror as he began scrolling through contacts that included names like Deputy Attorney General and Civil Rights Chief. Wait, Karen said desperately. Please, can't we handle this privately? I made a mistake. I admit that. But surely we don't need to involve federal agencies over a simple neighborhood disagreement. David looked at her with the expression he usually reserved for defendants who had just admitted to committing the crimes they were charged with. Ma'am, you physically assaulted a disabled child and stole her mobility aids while proclaiming your authority to enforce discriminatory policies. This isn't a neighborhood disagreement. This is a federal crime. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Karen could see her perfectly ordered life crumbling around her, the HOA position she had fought so hard to obtain, her reputation as a community leader, her standing among the neighbors who had once viewed her as their protector against undesirable elements. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. Karen Whitmore, I have lived in this neighborhood for 37 years, and I have never seen anything as disgusting as what you did to this child today. You should be ashamed of yourself. Other neighbors began to voice their agreement, their shock giving way to outrage as they fully processed what they had witnessed. Karen found herself surrounded by the very community she had claimed to protect. But now, they were looking at her with the same contempt she had directed at Lily. David finished his phone call and turned back to the group. Local police are en route, along with agents from my division who specialize in disability rights violations. Ma'am, I strongly advise you to contact an attorney. Karen's voice cracked as desperation overtook her attempt at composure. Mr. Morrison, please, I have children too. I made a terrible mistake, but I was just trying to protect our community. Surely we can work this out without destroying my entire life. David knelt down beside Lily again, his voice gentle as he spoke to his daughter. Sweetheart, are you ready to go home? We can come back for the reading program another day. Lily looked up at her father with eyes that seemed older than her 10 years. Daddy, will other kids with disabilities be safe to walk in our neighborhood now? The question cut through the morning air like a blade, exposing the heart of why federal civil rights protections existed in the first place. David felt pride swell in his chest at his daughter's concern for others, even in her own moment of pain. Yes, sweetheart, he said firmly. They will be safe. I'm going to make sure of that. He stood and addressed Karen directly, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. Ma'am, what you did today wasn't just an attack on my daughter. It was an attack on every disabled person who might want to participate in community life. The law exists specifically to prevent people like you from using your perceived authority to terrorize vulnerable populations. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, growing louder as multiple vehicles converged on the quiet residential street. Karen watched in mounting horror as two police cars, followed by a black SUV with government plates, pulled up to the curb. 4 FBI agents emerged from the SUV with the crisp efficiency of federal law enforcement. They were dressed in standard business attire, but something in their bearing made it clear they were not neighborhood social workers. These were investigators who had built careers prosecuting civil rights violations, and they approached the scene with the same methodical precision they would bring to a federal courthouse. Agent Sarah Chen, David's deputy director and lead investigator for disability rights cases, took charge of the scene immediately. She had prosecuted dozens of similar cases school districts that excluded disabled students, employers who refused reasonable accommodations, housing authorities that violated accessibility requirements. Director Morrison, she said professionally, though her eyes were warm with concern when they fell on Lily. We've documented the initial complaint. Local police will handle the immediate assault charges, but we'll be conducting a comprehensive investigation into potential civil rights violations. Karen watched in growing panic as Agent Chen began photographing the scene, the scraped concrete where Lily had fallen, the scattered contents of her backpack, the crutches that had been so violently taken from her. Each photograph represented another piece of evidence in what was rapidly becoming a federal case. The lead police officer, Sergeant Williams, approached David with the respect accorded to federal law enforcement. Director Morrison, we'll need formal statements from all witnesses, but based on initial reports, we have grounds for arrest on charges of assault on a minor, theft, and violation of civil rights under color of authority. Karen felt the last of her composure collapse. Under color of authority, I was just enforcing HOA rules. I never claimed to be a government official. Agent Chen turned to address her with the patient tone of someone who had explained this concept many times before. Ma'am, color of authority includes any claim to have official power to enforce laws or regulations. Your self-appointment as aesthetic compliance officer and your claims of legal authority to confiscate mobility aids both constitute acting under color of authority. She consulted her notes with professional efficiency, combined with the disability-based nature of your actions. This elevates the charges to federal civil rights violations under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. The technical legal language seemed to drain the last of Karen's resistance. She slumped against her garden gate, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured balloon. The woman who had strutted onto the sidewalk like a conquering general now looked small and defeated, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward with Lily's scattered belongings, her voice gentle as she addressed the child. Sweetheart, I saved your bookmark, the one that says, Future Librarian. I think that's wonderful. Lily managed a small smile, the first since the ordeal began. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I was going to share my favorite book today. Well, Mrs. Henderson said with determination. Why don't we reschedule our reading program for this afternoon, I think, after all this excitement? We could all use some time with good books and friendly people. David nodded approvingly. That sounds perfect. But first, we need to get these scrapes cleaned up and make sure Lily is okay. Agent Chen finished her preliminary documentation and approached Karen, who was now visibly shaking. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The familiar Miranda warning echoed through the quiet neighborhood, transforming Karen from self-appointed authority figure to federal defendant in the span of a single morning. Her neighbors watched in stunned silence as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The same hands that had so confidently seized Lily's crutches now restrained behind her back. As Karen was led to the police car, she turned back toward David with one last desperate plea. "My children. My job. Please. I have a mortgage. Responsibilities." David's expression remained impassive. "Ma'am, I suggest you focus on getting legal representation. The federal prosecution of civil rights violations is a serious matter that requires experienced counsel." The police car pulled away with Karen in the back seat, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, her pearl necklace askew. The woman who had awakened that morning as the self-proclaimed protector of neighborhood standards was now facing federal charges that could result in significant fines and prison time. Agent Chen reviewed her notes one final time before addressing the assembled neighbors. "Folks, we'll be conducting interviews with witnesses over the next few days. This type of systematic harassment often indicates broader patterns that require investigation." Jerry, the senior security guard, cleared his throat nervously. "Agent Chen, should we be documenting other complaints Mrs. Whitmore has made? She's called us out dozens of times for various violations." "Absolutely," Agent Chen replied. "Any pattern of discriminatory enforcement will be relevant to our investigation. We'll need copies of all incident reports involving Mrs. Whitmore's complaints." David helped Lily into their car, making sure her crutches were securely positioned and her backpack properly arranged. As they prepared to leave for home and medical attention, neighbors continued to approach with expressions of support and outrage over what they had witnessed. Mrs. Chen from across the street shook her head in disgust. "I always thought Karen was a bit much with her rules and complaints, but I never imagined she would physically attack a child. That poor little girl." Tom, the younger security guard, looked shaken by the morning's events. "Sir, I want you to know that we would never have supported what happened here. When Mrs. Whitmore called about a violation, we expected maybe an improperly parked car or something. Not this." David nodded with understanding. "You responded appropriately once you understood the situation. The problem isn't with security doing their job. It's with individuals who abuse their perceived authority to target vulnerable people." As they drove away from the scene, Lily was quiet for several minutes before speaking. "Daddy, will I be able to go to the reading program without being scared?" David glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, his heart breaking at the question no child should have to ask. "Yes, sweetheart. I promise you'll be safe. And more importantly, other kids with disabilities will be safe too." The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Agent Chen's team discovered that Karen's complaints over the past 2 years showed a clear pattern of targeting families with disabled members, elderly residents with mobility aids, and anyone whose appearance didn't meet her arbitrary standards of neighborhood appropriateness. The HOA board, upon learning of the federal investigation, immediately revoked Karen's self-appointed position and issued a formal apology to the Morrison family. They also implemented new policies requiring sensitivity training for all board members and explicit protections for residents with disabilities. 3 weeks later, Karen stood in federal court as the judge read the charges against her violation of civil rights under color of authority: assault on a minor, theft, and conspiracy to deny equal protection under the law. Her attorney, A public defender, overwhelmed by the complexity of federal civil rights law, advised her to accept a plea agreement. The sentence was comprehensive and designed to address both punishment and deterrence. Karen received 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised probation, and a permanent prohibition from serving in any HOA or community organization capacity. She was also required to pay restitution for Lily's medical expenses and attend extensive sensitivity training regarding disability rights. Perhaps most significantly, the judge ordered Karen to perform 500 hours of community service at organizations serving disabled individuals, under the supervision of the same Civil Rights Division that had prosecuted her case. But the most profound change came in the Willow Creek neighborhood itself. Mrs. Henderson's afternoon reading program became a weekly event, with special focus on books about acceptance, diversity, and courage. Lily became one of the program's most enthusiastic participants, sharing her love of literature with other children who learned that differences were something to celebrate rather than hide. The community center installed new accessibility features, including automatic door openers and adjustable seating areas. A small memorial garden was planted near the entrance, with a plaque reading, "In celebration of all who contribute to our community, regardless of ability." 6 months after that terrible Saturday morning, Lily stood at the podium in the same community center where she had been heading when Karen attacked her. She was addressing the monthly HOA meeting, sharing her thoughts on what it meant to be a contributing member of a diverse community. "Sometimes people think that being different means you can't contribute," she said, her voice clear and confident despite her young age. "But my crutches don't make me less capable of reading books, making friends, or helping my neighbors. They just make me capable in a different way." The audience, many of whom had witnessed her assault 6 months earlier, rose in sustained applause. Among them sat Jerry and Tom, the security guards who had helped document the incident, Mrs. Henderson with her walker, and dozens of neighbors who had learned something profound about justice, community, and the courage required to protect the vulnerable. David Morrison watched from the back of the room, his eyes bright with pride. His daughter had faced the worst kind of cruelty and emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more determined to ensure others wouldn't suffer the same treatment. In the end, Karen's attempt to exclude Lily from the community had instead made her one of its most cherished members. The federal case had sent ripples throughout similar communities nationwide, with HOA boards implementing new policies and training programs to prevent discrimination. Karen's name became synonymous in civil rights circles, with the consequences of abusing perceived authority to target vulnerable populations. As for Karen herself, her time in federal prison and subsequent community service gradually opened her eyes to the humanity she had spent so many years trying to exclude. The woman who had once seen mobility aids as disruptions to aesthetic harmony learned to see them as tools that enabled full participation in community life. Her mandatory service at a disability advocacy center put her in daily contact with individuals whose courage and determination challenged every assumption she had held about what it meant to contribute to society. Slowly, painfully, she began to understand the magnitude of the harm she had caused, not just to Lily, but to countless others who had faced her discriminatory enforcement over the years. The day she completed her community service, Karen wrote a letter to the Morrison family. It took her 17 attempts to find words adequate to express her remorse and her commitment to spending the rest of her life working to repair the damage she had done. David read the letter carefully before showing it to Lily, who had grown 2 inches taller and infinitely more confident in the years since the attack. His daughter considered the apology with the same thoughtful deliberation she brought to her beloved books. "Do you think she really understands now, Daddy?" Lily asked. David smiled at his daughter's wisdom. I think she's beginning to understand, sweetheart. And that's how real change happens, one person at a time. Learning to see the world through someone else's eyes. The Willow Creek neighborhood had indeed changed, transformed from a place where differences were seen as threats to be eliminated into a community that celebrated the diverse contributions of all its members. Children with disabilities played in the parks, alongside their typical peers. Elderly residents with mobility aids participated fully in community events. And the reading program, that had nearly been denied to Lily, became a model for inclusive programming throughout the county. And on Saturday mornings, when Lily walked to the community center with her crutches and her beloved books, neighbors waved from their gardens, and children called out greetings from their sidewalk games. The child who had once been seen as a disruption to neighborhood aesthetics had become living proof that true community strength comes from embracing rather than excluding, from celebrating rather than suppressing the beautiful diversity of human experience. In the end, Karen's attempt to silence one small voice had instead amplified the message that every person, regardless of ability, age, or appearance, deserves to participate fully in the communities they call home. The federal prosecution had been swift and severe, but the lasting change came from the community itself, choosing to stand with the vulnerable rather than the powerful, choosing inclusion over exclusion, choosing love over fear. Years later, when Lily graduated high school as valedictorian and announced her intention to study disability rights law like her father, the same community center that had nearly been denied to her erupted in celebration. The girl who had fallen face first on the concrete because someone couldn't tolerate her differences had risen to become a voice for justice, a beacon of hope, and living proof that the most important battles for civil rights are often fought on quiet suburban sidewalks by small children with big hearts and the courage to keep walking forward, one step at a time.